The chapel was filled with whispers, but all Ilara could hear was the silence of the man standing beside her. She did not need to see the guests to know they were starring. She felt their pity like a cold draft against her skin, and she felt his indifference even more. The Duke of Thornwood, Aldrich Vance, no, Aldrich Thornwood, her husband now in name only, stood rigid and distant, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the altar, beyond her, beyond this moment entirely. When the Archbishop asked him to speak his vows, he did so with clipped, emotionless precision, as though he were reciting a business contract. He never once looked at her, not when she stumbled over her own vows, her voice barely above a trembling breath, not when the priest declared them man and wife, not even when the guests rose to offer hollow congratulations. He simply took her arm with a grip that was firm but entirely impersonal, led her down the aisle, and handed her into a waiting carriage without a single word. The door closed, and Ilara sat alone across from him in the dim interior, the velvet seat cold beneath her hands. She was a duchess now, yet she had never felt more invisible. They arrived at Thornwood Hall late that night. The vast stone manor loomed against a starless sky, its windows dark save for a few flickering candles. Servants lined the entrance, their faces carefully blank. A housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, stepped forward and curtsied, her eyes kind but cautious. The Duke did not introduce Ilara. He simply walked inside, leaving her to follow. She trailed behind him through cavernous corridors, her slippers echoing on the marble floor. At the top of the grand staircase, he stopped before a door, opened it, and gestured inside. "Your chambers," he said. His voice was deep and cold like a frozen lake. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the silence. Ilara stood on the threshold, staring at the elegant but unwelcoming room. A fire had been lit, yet the chill remained. She did not cry. She was too tired for tears. But as she closed the door and leaned her forehead against the carved wood, a single thought echoed through her mind. He does not want me here. The first weeks at Thornwood Hall passed in a blur of isolation. The Duke was seldom home, and when he was, he took his meals in his study or rode out at dawn and returned after dark. Ilara wandered the halls like a ghost, learning the rhythm of a house that did not welcome her. The servants were polite but distant, their loyalties clearly belonging to the master who had never wanted a wife. The whispers followed her even here. She was the daughter of a disgraced baron, a man accused of treason before his sudden death. Her family name had been dragged through mud, and the Duke of Thornwood's sudden offer of marriage had saved her from ruin, but it had also made her an object of speculation. Why had he married her? What debt did he owe? What bargain had been struck? Ilara asked herself the same questions, and the answers never brought comfort. One afternoon, unable to bear the silence any longer, she ventured into the east wing. There she found a small, unused parlor with windows overlooking the gardens. The room was dusty, forgotten, much like herself. She began to clean it, not because anyone asked, but because she needed something to do. Mrs. Pemberton found her there, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a window pane. The older woman's stern expression softened. "Your Grace, you needn't do such work." Ilara smiled faintly. "I'm a duchess with no duties, Mrs. Pemberton. Allow me this small purpose." The housekeeper hesitated, then nodded. That small moment of kindness became a seed of hope. Over the following days, Mrs. Pemberton began to speak to her more openly. She told Ilara about the tenant families who lived on the estate's edges, people who had been struggling since the last harvest. The Duke, she said quietly, had been so consumed by other matters that he had not visited them in months. Ilara listened, and something shifted inside her. She could not win her husband's heart, but perhaps she could do something that mattered. She started small. With Mrs. Pemberton's guidance, she packed baskets of food and medicine and walked to the nearest village. The tenants were wary at first, but Ilara did not play the grand lady. She knelt in the dirt to speak with an old farmer's wife, helped bandage a child's scraped knee, and listened to their troubles without flinching. She returned the next week, and the week after that. Soon, the villagers began to greet her with smiles. They called her the kind Duchess, and the name warmed her more than any fire ever could. She learned their names, their stories, their hopes. She began to spend her days among them, helping with herbal remedies her own mother had taught her, organizing repairs for leaking roofs, and writing letters to charitable societies in the Duke's name. The work gave her strength. She no longer waited at the window for a husband who never came. She no longer dressed in silks for dinners he never attended. She wore simple gowns, pinned her hair back without adornment, and found a quiet dignity in being useful. Months passed before the Duke noticed any change. He returned from London one evening, weary and distracted, and found the house unusually empty. The servants seemed rushed, and Mrs. Pemberton was nowhere to be seen. When he finally found her in the kitchens preparing more baskets, he demanded an explanation. "Her Grace has been tending to the tenants, my lord," she said carefully. "She has been doing so for some time now." He frowned, as though the concept of his wife doing anything at all was foreign to him. That night at dinner, Alara appeared in a plain gray dress, her hair simply braided. She sat across from him, and for the first time he truly looked at her. She was not the trembling bride he remembered. She was composed, her eyes steady, her movements unhurried. She asked him polite questions about his journey, and he gave short, distracted answers. But he noticed that she did not seek his approval. She did not lean toward him or try to fill the silence. She simply existed, calm and self-contained, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The real change began when Lord Tristan Thornwood returned. He was the Duke's younger brother, a man of easy smiles and effortless charm. Where Aldrich was stone, Tristan was sunlight. He arrived unannounced one afternoon, striding into the hall as though he owned it, his laughter echoing off the walls. Alara met him in the drawing room, and he bowed extravagantly, kissing her hand with a warmth that was almost scandalous. "So you are the mysterious bride," he said, his eyes sparkling. "I must say my brother has kept you hidden far too long." She found herself smiling despite herself. Tristan was entertaining, and his attention was a balm after so much coldness. He asked her about the estate, about the tenants, and he listened with genuine interest. When he suggested they take a walk in the gardens the next day, she agreed without hesitation. Aldrich watched them from the library window. He saw his wife laugh at something Tristan said, her face bright and unguarded in a way he had never witnessed. A tightness settled in his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. He told himself it was irritation at his brother's frivolity, nothing more. But when dinner came and Tristan monopolized Alara's conversation, making her eyes light up with stories of his travels, Aldrich found he could barely eat. He sat at the head of the table, silent and brooding, while his brother charmed his wife. Afterward, he retreated to his study and poured himself a brandy, but the image of her smile stayed with him, taunting him. She had never smiled at him like that. He had never given her reason to. Following week, Tristan became a constant presence. He brought Alara small gifts, a book of poetry, a silk ribbon, a cluster of wildflowers he had picked himself. He accompanied her to the village and charmed the tenants just as easily as he charmed everyone else. Alara found herself enjoying his company, though a part of her remained guarded. She was not naive. She knew Tristan's attentions could mean nothing serious, but they filled a void she had long tried to ignore. For the first time, she felt seen. And Aldrich saw it all. He began to appear in places he had never bothered to visit before. He rode out to the village and found Alara there, laughing with a child on her hip. He joined them for dinner every night, his presence a silent storm at the end of the table. He watched Tristan's every move, and when his brother placed a hand on Alara's arm, he felt a surge of possessiveness that shocked him. He had no right to feel this way. He had treated her as a stranger. Yet the thought of losing her, even to his own brother, ignited something fierce and desperate inside him. One evening, a small gathering was held at the hall for the local gentry. Music played and a few couples danced in the great hall. Tristan immediately claimed Alara for a waltz. She hesitated, but his charm won her over. They moved across the floor with surprising grace, and Tristan leaned close, murmuring something that made her cheeks flush. Aldrich stood by the fireplace, his jaw tight. When the dance ended, he crossed the room and cut in before Tristan could lead her into another. "My turn, I believe," he said, his voice low and hard. Alara looked up at him, startled. It was the first time he had ever asked her to dance. She took his hand and he led her into the waltz. His grip was firm, his steps precise, but there was a tension in his body she did not understand. They danced in silence, and she felt the eyes of the room upon them. "You have been spending a great deal of time with my brother," he said quietly. She met his gaze without flinching. "He has been kind to me. I did not think kindness was forbidden here." The words stung, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been guilt. But he said nothing more. The dance ended, and he released her, his hand lingering for just a moment before he turned away. Alara watched him go, her heart a confusing tangle of hurt and hope. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon when Tristan cornered her in the conservatory. His easy smile was gone, replaced by an intensity that made her uneasy. "You deserve more than this cold life, Alara," he said softly. "My brother will never love you. He is incapable of it, but I could give you happiness." She stepped back, her pulse quickening. "Lord Tristan, you forget yourself." He reached for her hand, his grip gentle but insistent. "Come away with me. Leave this dreary place. I have a villa in Italy. We could be so happy." Before she could answer, the door slammed open. Aldrich stood there, rain-soaked and furious, his eyes blazing with a fire she had never seen. He crossed the room in 3 strides and seized Tristan by the collar, pulling him away from her. "You dare," he growled, his voice shaking with rage. "You dare try to take her from me?" Tristan laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Take her? You never had her brother. You left her alone to wither, and now you act the wounded husband. It is pathetic." Aldrich's fist connected with Tristan's jaw, sending him sprawling onto the tiled floor. Alara cried out, but neither man looked at her. Tristan staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. "You want to know the truth, Alara," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "Ask your husband why he really married you. Ask him what he was hiding." And then he stormed out, leaving a terrible silence in his wake. Alara stood frozen, her heart pounding. Aldrich remained motionless, his back to her, his shoulders heaving. "What does he mean?" she whispered. He did not turn. "It is nothing, lies." But his voice was hollow. She walked around to face him, and what she saw in his expression made her breath catch. Beneath the anger was a deep, raw fear. "Tell me," she said softly. "After all this time, I think I deserve the truth." He looked at her then, truly looked, and the walls he had built for so long seemed to crack before her eyes. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, worn letter. He pressed it into her hands without a word. With trembling fingers, she opened it and began to read. The letter was addressed to Aldrich from a man she had never heard of, a former steward of her father's estate. It detailed a conspiracy, a plot to ruin her family. False evidence of treason had been planted, and behind it all was Tristan. He had orchestrated the entire scandal, driven by jealousy and a desire to secure his own inheritance by keeping Aldrich unmarried and isolated. The plan had worked perfectly until Aldrich discovered the truth. But by then, her father was dead from the shock, her mother had faded away, and Alara was left penniless and disgraced. Aldrich had married her to protect her, to give her his name and shield her from a world that would have destroyed her. He had kept Tristan's involvement a secret, because revealing it would have dragged her family's name through yet more scandal, and because a part of him still clung to the hope that his brother could be redeemed. He had kept his distance because he believed himself unworthy of her, and because he was terrified that if he let her in, she would see the darkness in his own family and recoil from him forever. Alara's hands shook as she finished the letter. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away. She looked up at the man who had been a stranger to her, and she finally understood. He had saved her not out of duty or debt, but out of love, a love he had buried so deep that it had turned to stone inside him. "You should have told me," she said, her voice breaking. "I would have understood. I would have stayed by your side." He shook his head, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I did not know how. Every time I looked at you, I saw what my family had done to yours. I saw the pain I could not undo. I thought it was better to keep you at a distance, to let you find your own peace without me." She stepped closer, her heart aching. "But I was so alone, Aldrich. I thought you despised me." His composure shattered. He reached for her, his hands trembling, and cupped her face as though she were made of glass. "Despise you? I have loved you from the moment I first saw you at a ball years ago, before all of this horror. You were laughing, and the sound of it stayed with me for weeks. When I learned what Tristan had done, I swore I would protect you, even if you never knew it, even if you never loved me back." A sob escaped her, and she leaned into his touch. He pulled her gently into his arms, and she felt the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. It was the first time he had ever held her, and it felt like coming home to a place she had never been allowed to enter. That night they talked for hours. They sat in his study, the fire crackling softly, and Aldrich told her everything. He told her about their childhood, about how Tristan had always been the favored son, the charming one, while Aldrich had been the stoic heir, burdened with responsibility. He told her about the woman he had once thought he loved, who had left him for a wealthier man, and how that betrayal had hardened his heart. He told her that when he saw her ruined, he saw his own failures reflected, and he could not bear to face her. And he told her that her quiet strength, her dignity, her kindness to the tenants had slowly melted the ice around him, day by day, until he could no longer pretend he did not care. He confessed that seeing Tristan try to take her had made him realize how close he was to losing the only light he had ever known. He knelt before her, his proud head bowed, and said, "I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." Alara took his hands and raised him up. "We have both been wounded," she said gently, "but I do not want a life of bitterness. I want to heal, and I want to heal with you." He drew her into his embrace once more, and this time when he kissed her forehead, it was a promise. The days that followed were fragile but beautiful. Tristan was banished from the estate, his schemes exposed to the family solicitor. He left for the continent, and the shadow he had cast began to fade. Aldrich and Alara slowly learned to be husband and wife. He joined her on her visits to the tenants, and the villagers marveled at the change in their duke. He smiled more, his voice grew gentle, and he looked at his duchess with a tenderness that needed no words. They took long walks in the gardens where he told her stories of his youth, and she shared memories of her parents. They planted a rose garden together, a symbol of new beginnings. He brought her breakfast himself one morning, a tray of fresh bread and tea, and she laughed at his awkward attempt at domesticity. It was a sound he would treasure forever. One evening, as summer softened into autumn, they sat on the terrace overlooking the hills. The sky was painted in hues of amber and gold. Aldrich reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate sapphire ring, its stone the color of a twilight sky. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said quietly. "She was the only person in this family who ever truly loved me. I want you to have it, not as a symbol of duty, but as a symbol of my heart, which is yours entirely." Tears slipped down her cheeks as he slid the ring onto her finger. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his cloak around them both, holding her close. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of all the words they did not need to speak. The healing was not instant, and some wounds left scars that would always be tender, but they faced them together. When nightmares of her past plagued her, he was there to hold her until the trembling stopped. When his old fears of vulnerability rose up, she met them with patience and quiet reassurance. The great hall of Thornwood, once so cold and forbidding, now echoed with laughter and the warmth of shared lives. The servants, who had once pitied the lonely Duchess, now beamed at the sight of the Duke and Duchess walking hand in hand. Mrs. Pemberton confessed to Alara one day that she had never seen the master so happy. "You brought him back to life, Your Grace," she said, and Alara simply smiled, knowing that he had done the same for her. On the first anniversary of that fateful night when truth had shattered the walls between them, Aldrich led Alara to the chapel where they had been married. It was empty, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. He took her hands and spoke his vows again, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "I, Aldrich, take you, Alara, not as a stranger bound by duty, but as the keeper of my soul. I promise to see you every day for the rest of my life." She repeated her own vows, her voice ringing clear and strong, and this time there were no whispers, only the profound silence of a love finally acknowledged. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a seal upon their new beginning. Outside, the world continued on, but inside that sacred space, two hearts that had once been so far apart beat as one. The road had been long and the pain had been deep, but in the end love had found them, not in a sudden flash, but in the quiet, stubborn unfolding of two souls choosing each other, day by day, moment by moment, until the past was not a weight but a foundation for a future filled with hope. And as they walked out into the cool night air, the stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter, as though even the heavens were rejoicing.